Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom. Good afternoon, friends, and welcome to a presentation today sponsored by the Faith-Based Online Learning Directors and provided by Larry Hopperton, the Director of Distributed Learning Technology at Tyndale University College and Seminary in Toronto, Canada. I'd like to welcome everyone to this presentation and to now turn the presentation over to Larry. Hello, Larry. Welcome.
Hello, Sebastian. Thank you. Just as I get started, I was at the Access conference a couple weeks ago, and I found that the term distance education was being used all the time. And I find that term has become a real anomaly because it implies a separation of geography. I think that in modern learning these days, it's a limited term. And so I'm using the term distributed learning instead, and I'd like to tell you why. Distributed learning is a broad label that applies to any sort of education in which the learner and the instructor are separated by time or geography for all or for part of the course. While current terms generally implies a form of technically mediated learning or supported learning, in the past this could also apply to any form of distance education, including interactive or self-paced online, correspondence-based distance education, lecture radio, or open university model involving periodic meetings with faculty or tutors. Distance learning is really the convergence of distance education methodologies and the synchronous classroom, but the term describes a continuum between the classroom and fully technically mediated learning. It can combine the classroom environment with online learning, providing both the flexibility and responsibility of self-paced study with personal, albeit potentially mediated, interaction. So we really think about this more like a continuum. At one end of the scale, we have traditional classroom-based learning where it's really professor-centered, and at the other end, we have a fully online program. And everything in between represents the distributed learning spectrum. So as soon as a faculty member posts a syllabus online, they have joined the spectrum. And the question that we have is, how do we move them along that spectrum? Traditional education is largely based upon a transmission model that originated in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance schools. And this is probably, I'm 62, this is the way I went to school, prof in front of the classroom lecturing. This model remains very active today, and it's focused on the subject matter expert who could discern learner needs and fill the empty vessel. In other words, it's a passive, lecture-driven approach and one-directional from the professor to the student. But with the advent of the computer age, the demographics of students have changed substantially. Contemporary students are now digital natives, often more digitally literate than their professors. They're tethered to their digital devices and accustomed to accessing information at the touch of a button. This new technical literacy is screen-based, involving text, audio, and images. And with so many resources available on the web, learning for the contemporary students is a process of exploration and discovery, investigation and information retrieval, and assembling knowledge from disparate fragments. Now, although the term distributed learning covers a broad range of applications, there are some consistent characteristics drawn from distance education, which most applications share. Many of these differentiate distributed learning from the traditional classroom transmission model. Because course content is largely delivered through technically mediated methods, there's a spectrum of potential separation from the instructor and learner during the learning process. Classrooms no longer need to be used for the transmission of content. Instead, students are expected to have gone through the course material before assembling, either in the classroom or via media, for enriched clarification and focused discussions. This is really a flipped classroom kind of approach. And I just finished my second flipped classroom yesterday. Using media-based communications, either between individuals or groups, students can both participate in discussions and initiate them. Key here is that the use of print and media elements is excluded from the classroom, so the classroom time can be changed from information dispensing to educational engagement and enrichment. The goal of distributed learning is to provide a more learner-centered approach to education. By integrating a number of both synchronous and asynchronous technologies and blending elements of both open learning and distance education, institutions are able to create high-quality and cost-effective instruction. These courses are designed to encourage higher-order thinking through the provision of observable and measurable learning outcomes, choices in activities and assignments that allow learners to become more self-directed, realistic and structured sequencing contents and assignments, decreased lecture time, and increased active interaction and collaborative interaction. This is causing institutional change, and it's accelerating. Institutions have typically changed far more slowly than the technology and the models of learning. And distributed learning is forcing them to consider change options so as to construct learning environments that enable students to become increasingly engaged and increase the enrollments. The internet offers learning opportunities that are collaborative, exploratory, and participatory, but its application in education requires that educators understand the profundity of what the internet can offer as a learning environment, while not ignoring the value and importance of live interaction. From a pragmatic point of view, the scalability of distributed education provides institutions with the ability to accommodate growing enrollments in both local and distance applications. This provides new revenue streams, but in doing so, it has become the catalyst for institutional transformation by providing the impetus for thinking about content and pedagogy focused on information-age learning styles and developing a more learner-centered focus for education that leads directly to increased enrollments. The tools and learning models for distributed learning are already in place. It has become common for institutions to have websites and email. Many are using learning management systems for both face-to-face and fully online learning. Libraries are linked using worldwide electronic text repositories. Models for both online learning and mixed mode or blended learning have been implemented widely, and distributed learning has already established a solid place in the educational mosaic. Post-secondary institutions are extending their reach to new students and student retention through distributed learning, technology, and methodology. I should point out, just as an aside, that the distributed learning activity that I've been involved in Tyndale has accounted for up to 40% of the graduate enrollment, and that is still increasing. Distributed learning does take a lead from online education, in that the educational institution is often involved in the planning, design, and development of the educational materials, and in providing student support services, including technical support and online library resources. Often, the easiest conversion is to take a fully robust, asynchronous online course and repurpose it for the synchronous classroom. Online learning has been established as a distributed mode of learning that achieves comparable results, both academically and in terms of student satisfaction and acceptance to traditional classrooms. The premise behind most online courses is an explicit statement of the observable and measurable learning outcomes. This is a cornerstone of a systematic instructional design approach. But we're also seeing online faculty using modified approaches to their traditional classroom courses. Since all content exists in a structured format in the online course, this being made available to classroom students in both mixed mode and regular classrooms, so that the process of information acquisition is shifted away from the classroom in favor of enriched discussions and amplification and more applied activities. This is a shift in the role of the classroom and the lecturer in education, but it's based upon a fully robust and tested online course. More and more I see this happening. An online instructor will essentially pull out the collaborative aspects of the course and use exactly the same content in their face-to-face course. Like any educational change, though, distributed learning does face resistance and barriers. Given the potential and scalability of distributed learning, these need to be addressed at the institutional level. For example, faculty agreements typically specify course loads and often course enrollment caps. But a goal of adopting distributed learning technologies is to expand enrollments and to service learners more effectively. This can conflict with existing faculty agreements. But this can be solved through the use of tutors or contract faculty to deliver a pre-designed course. But depending upon the institutional agreements and the distributed learning application, this can violate contracts and raise issues pertaining to intellectual property. If I can just point out from that, one of the situations we're facing right now at Tyndale is online classes are getting huge. We originally had caps of about 25 on them, and as the wait lists built out, we then started scrambling for ways to accommodate the extra students. One way that we have done is to put in tutors into the larger courses. So typically, we will now have a cap of about 50 on a course with a professor and a tutor, but we have not formalized the activities of the tutor. That discussion is currently underway. And while it's underway, in the last discussion, I said, we're talking about what are we going to do with a tutor in a class of 50. Maybe we should be talking about what are we going to do with a tutor in a class of 100, because it's looking like we're going in that direction. I've already got classes with 60 and 70 in them, and they are getting a little difficult to manage. The financial models also need revisiting. Distributed learning can lead to enhanced enrollments, but this raises the question not only of intellectual property, but also how the unanticipated revenues are being shared with the content developers who are academically recognized subject matter experts. I'm going to use something that's considered a dirty word at Tyndale, and that's the word royalty. The publishing industry uses a royalty model for this. The publisher purchases the intellectual property outright from the author and agrees to pay a royalty based upon mutually acceptable, albeit wide-ranging conditions. Similarly, developmental contracts between institutions and faculty will have to address issues such as intellectual property, fees for service, rights of refusal to teach, and the status of the course in each case. There are instances already in use where faculty retain the intellectual property ownership, but the institution owns the instance of the course and can continue to offer it should the faculty member exercise the right of first refusal or has reached capacity under general faculty agreements. Scheduling is another sticking point. While distributed learning is able to generate and handle increasing enrollments, it's often limited by the locked-in semester structures of institutions. This can be overcome by staggered cohorts on a more continuous intake model, but this challenges administrative structures such as administration, registration, and graduation. A further issue pertains to the synergy possible through the reuse of developed courses across diverse populations of learners. Since the basic content of the distributed learning course is largely present in electronic form, it can be adapted to meet the needs of continuing education or non-credit learning populations. For example, a graduate level course can be realigned to meet the needs of undergraduate learners. We have at Tyndale the instance where History of Christianity 1 and 2 is taught by the same professor to both the seminary and the undergrads. And all we did was tweak the online course to lower the academic level to meet the needs of the university. Another one that I'm actively moving on right now is based upon the Alpha model developed by the Anglican Church. I'm sure you're all familiar with this, where it's a series of videos plus face-to-face discussions among small groups. One of the issues that I'm pointing out with this idea is that if you attend university displays at the high schools, you find that Tyndale is the one where the students aren't going. And when I've gone to them and asked about that, what the students tell me is we don't know who they are. And that then is saying our model for recruiting is a bit off. The demographic we're looking for is not necessarily in the high school, but they are in the churches. My daughter, for example, 17 years old, goes to church with me every week. It's kind of nice. What I have proposed is that we take our Bible studies courses and we retweak them into the format of Alpha and put them into the churches at minimal cost, with the intent of putting the name of Tyndale in front of the kids in the church and the parents and the grandparents. Now we'll see what happens, but it says I'm taking already developed distributed learning materials and rejigging them for a different market with a different goal. In other words, a robust course can be extended well beyond its initially identified markets and can be readily adjusted to support unanticipated learners. But this too raises that question of intellectual property and compensation. Clearly, consistent and fair business models and practices need to be developed and implemented in order to both support and exploit the potential of the distributed learning continuum. A further issue pertains to the synergy possible through the reuse of developed courses across diverse populations of learners. Since the basic content of the distributed learning course is largely present, it can be adapted to meet the needs of these additional populations. This has happened. For example, a graduate level course can be realigned to meet the needs of undergraduates, as I mentioned, and rejig further for interest learners. We have a situation going now up here where a large church in London, Ontario, is using Tyndale courses as both personal enrichment for the congregation and also as credit-based, so that the congregation can proceed towards an MDiv in their home parish. We've done 5 courses that way so far, and it looks like we're going to do the whole degree. Distributed learning, in its many different manifestations, presents teaching and learning with an opportunity for positive change, providing a more learner-centered focus for students and a satisfying and learning facilitating approach for faculty. Together, these can heighten the learning experience by optimizing the available learning resources. It allows for extending the reach of institutions to greater numbers of learners while maintaining the importance of interaction. But this, in turn, can challenge the existing structures of institutions. And I've only gone 19 minutes. Would anyone have a question?
Hey, good to see you again.
How are you doing?
We just saw each other at Axis.
Yes, we did.
Yeah. Interesting model. So you said that you are using this model at Tyndale, correct?
Yes.
I was curious about your financial model. Are you able to disclose how, so when you look at expenses and investment and all that compared to how much this is rendering, and I'm starting with the worst question ever, really,
sure.
Sustainability, but I'm quite interested in the sustainability, right? Because that proves more than just financial. It proves viability, it proves student interest, it proves a lot of stuff. So if you can talk more about that, I'll be very interested in that.
Okay. There's a couple of approaches that we're using. Mm-hmm. One is using tenured faculty, and the other is using adjuncts. In both cases, there is a stipend for developing the course. So I will work with the faculty to create the course, and they're paid, I think it's $3,500 to do that.
Okay.
The faculty will then teach, the full-time faculty will then teach under load.
Okay.
Whereas the adjunct faculties are paid a further $3,500 to teach. So that's pretty consistent with what happens in the regular. And the trade-off on this is, okay, so I've got a $6,000 upfront cost to recover, but if I'm putting 20 extra students into a course, the cost is recovered in the first semester. And a course will typically have a 3-year lifespan. So they're generating significant revenues. Typically, too, we see that the online courses we'll have, on average, 50 to 60% of the students outside the geographical area. So that's new money that we're bringing in the door. With areas like our flipped classrooms that I'm doing right now at the university, the goal is really twofold. The first is to overhaul a modular program that's been languishing for the last 10 years. And the second is to create programs that we can carry outside the university. Mm-hmm. Up until now, the university faculty have argued that all of their students are residential, so they don't want to get involved. Well, okay, if I've got 40% of the seminary population, why don't we have that in the UC as well? We're now talking about putting together courses specifically to reach beyond our geographical catch basin. So we're looking for increased enrollments everywhere.
Okay, what LMS are you using for this? Or go ahead.
I'm using Moodle.
Moodle.
And so, I really like it. I've administered about 6 or 8 different LMSs.
You know, it's open source. So is it customized to encompass all this content that you're gathering from everywhere? And how do you handle, from a process perspective, the administration of the content?
I'm the system administrator.
Okay.
And I work with IT. There's levels of the system where I don't even want to go. That's what IT's for.
Yes.
So when I started using Moodle, it was straight out of the box.
Okay.
And I've built on it from there. One of the things I particularly like about Moodle is it is WCAG compliant to the level AA level. Mm-hmm. So as long as I'm sticking within my learning management system, I'm also achieving compliance on that aspect of it. I have to worry about the content. Mm-hmm. And the other piece with Moodle that I quite like is it is free, it is open source, but in using it, you agree to become part of the Moodle community. Mm-hmm. And that being said, if you develop some app for Moodle, that becomes the property of the community. And the result is, when we've had to do something between our main administrative systems and Moodle, the first place we go is the community and say, who's done this? Mm-hmm. And a lot of that material is readily available. Mm-hmm. Its drawback is it had to be integrated into the administrative systems so that when a student registers, they're automatically into the course.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. I've heard a few concerns. I was wondering what other type of concerns you've had, not necessarily concerns, but challenges you've had implementing, not from a buy-in perspective, but from a system perspective. I look at the regular process of so I've been in online education for 8 years, and I've multiple LMSs, different ways, and I see how challenging it is, even if you have an established, clear process in an online classroom, to really handle the entire all the moving pieces of course design and all mm-hmm. that, right? I'm curious, I feel distributed learning adds an element of complexity to the coursework. That's just how maybe I'm uninformed on it, but I feel it adds that element of complexity. So I'm curious if you can speak about that a little bit.
Sure. I would agree. It's an element of complexity, but it's also an element of flexibility. Mm-hmm. In my past, I was involved with AICC in the development of the SCORE model, which I was really quite entranced with at the time. But once it was released as the standard for learning management systems, like the rest of the cognitive science community, we didn't like it. Mm-hmm. It was a beautiful technical solution, but it didn't apply to learning. And that's where Moodle came along. Martin Dujamas started creating Moodle from the cognitive science perspective. The second thing is a very systematic instructional design approach that I use that says, I basically will describe my course as the assembly of Lego pieces. And I can change the Lego pieces anytime. I can adjust Lego pieces at any time. So as I want to move it from one market to another, it's really just a case of knowing which of those moving pieces I have to go and touch. And because of the design, it turns out to be fairly straightforward. Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious, if you don't mind,
Sure.
Is that a manual process, or are you using a script or an adaptive technology to actually handle that content? Because if not, I mean, I love the metaphor of the Lego, right?
Mm-hmm.
But how does that transcribe into actual process of how does that happen? Are you able to create a course and move content from one Moodle course to another, kind of put it together? Is that manual work, or is there a system you're using to create that?
No, it's manual work.
Okay.
Because the first thing that we're going to do, if they come along and say, I want to take this online course and turn it into something else, I want to know what the learning outcomes of the something else is. Because I'll structure everything towards observable and measurable outcomes. Okay. Once I've got those in place, then I can cherry pick my content to meet them. And if I have to create some new stuff, I often do. That's simple enough to do. But it is a manual process.
Okay. That makes sense.
And it's actually one of the things I'm worrying about these days, because I have not codified all this. It's all in my head. And pretty soon I'm going to have to sit down and write style sheets and like, how do you do all this stuff?
Yep. So this is a different presentation. I was really interested to hear about your distributed learning, but I am interested to show you how, in a different presentation, whenever you have time, to show you how Ready for Online actually does that whole curriculum mapping and content creation. Because this is what I've discovered, and that's why Ready for Online came to be, is that we are not maximizing our content. And so there's not maximizing, and so we're not mapping it. We're not squeezing everything we can out of it. We're not, we're wasting a lot of time with the content creation, with repeated tasks, everything that is problem with content creation right now.
Yes.
That's why we move towards a solution that sits outside of an LMS to centralize that whole course creation process. Once you're done with the course that is really cool, in whatever format you want it to have it, CEU, in whatever, all kinds of things, then you can move it in a ready format into your LMS and start teaching it. So it's Ready for Online. You have it on your award that you received.
Okay.
But that's basically what Ready for Online does. It centralizes the instructional design process into one location, so you can maximize the use of your content based on outcomes. So you can even have an entire program in there, and you can map the student learning objectives, the program educational goals within each content, each course. And then in each course, you make sure that everything is aligned. So every assessment you put in there, and you can create as many types of assessments you want, is aligned to the lesson objective, the objective of that specific module or week.
Okay.
And it creates the map for you. It actually visually, you can click on a map, and it shows you if everything is aligned. Right? And once you know that this, and it has a workload calculator built in, which really helps to know, okay, if I'm going to give them 100 pages to read, you can even clarify, very clearly choose what type of reading is it, and it's going to give you reading rates and writing rates. So you have some data with you as you build these courses. It's not just, it's not manual work, but it does it for you. It does the trivial work for you, right? So I'm very curious, especially knowing that you're moving into that innovative space, to see if that solution will work, because that might actually be a solution for you to not have to do that manually, for the system to do the trivial work for you, and then you just focus on the quality of that content, making sure it's aligned, it's creative, it's engaging, it's ready, and for the discussion, it has in-class discussion board or live webinar. It even tracks a live webinar that you want to add. And I know in distributed learning, that's an essential component, right?
Yes, it is.
To have that. So it even tracks that in every module or week, but you have to measure it in terms of time. So you can add time to it in the workload calculator for the live discussion to say, okay, I'm putting an hour of discussion, but I'm going to add another 20 minutes back and forth, right, to it. But that ties into the larger course and experience to say this course has 48 hours of work in 8 weeks or whatever.
Larry, you alluded to the fact that that this has not yet been written down. And like the gospel accounts from the first apostles, when they started getting on into their years, they decided they had to write down what it was that they had experienced in their time with Christ. You are in a similar kind of situation. How far away are you from retirement, and what is your primary occupation right now in terms of compliance, if you wouldn't mind?
Oh, in terms of compliance, first, the deadline in Canada, in Ontario, is January 1st, 2021, after which institutions can face fines of up to $100,000 a day for non-compliance.
Wow.
So I'm in dead heat. The Cody Award this year was my test of how my compliance approach is coming. Mm-hmm. And as you know, it was rather successful. I'm in the process of bringing all courses up to that same level, of ensuring that all new development is at that level. Basically, I'm running as fast as I can on that. So my plans are to get it through 2021, through January 2021, at which point I've already told my dean that there's a ship leaving Greenland in August 2021, and I'm planning on being on it. It's a research vessel going across the Northwest Passage.
Oh, God bless you.
She has said I can take 3 months. And I figured that when I come back, it will be time to say, okay, I'm going to retire in 6 months, 6 months more, and then take 6 months to find a replacement and to just document everything. It worries me that I know where every piece is that's been created, but I'm the only one who does. Mm-hmm. If a video goes sour, do they know where to find it? Mm-hmm. That all has to get written down. If there's a process that I'm using, and there is, let's document it so that someone can pick up and at least maintain the same level from the start.
Could something like what Aline is describing be of assistance in PACE over the next 2 years?
Quite possibly. I'm going to need to look into it further and see what we can do. Because there's a lot of this going on. And I only see it more and more. Mm-hmm.
Well, talking about once you created this system, the applications of this system in the world of Tyndale outreach. You had mentioned that you've got a London, Ontario project going on, an experiment to see whether or not these educational services can be transferable or applicable at the parish level. Mm-hmm. And then you mentioned that credits are being received by people who are participating in this program. How does the admissions process work? Those who are taking this for credit would have to, of course, fulfill Tyndale admissions, I'm guessing. Yes, they do. And they're paying full fees, as opposed to someone who's taking it for interest only, who's probably paying about $150. The full student has to do the assignments, all of that. It's marked by the professor of record, basically the person who developed the course initially. And it's overseen by the facilitator in that parish has a doctor of ministry from Tyndale. So we're not too worried about the credibility of the presentation. The administration can be a bit mucky since you've got so many different kinds of people going in there. Sure. But that's where we have a wonderful registrar who works those things out. Are those persons who are taking it for personal interest in paying $150, are they in the same sections of courses as those paying full price? Yes. Does the instructor have a way to distinguish among them? Yes. The instructor knows exactly who's doing what. And classes are, what are they? They're about 12. Not big. Okay. So it's easy to manage. The thing is, if it does get bigger, and the hope is it will, then we have to start worrying about administrative structures. Right. You had mentioned some classes are as many as 50. And you're thinking, or some classes you've got 60 or 70. You're thinking about how do we scale this to 100 or even greater? Absolutely. Yep. And there are, I've proposed a couple of models that have not yet been accepted. The most obvious one, and it goes back to my days at the University of Toronto, if you take intro psych at U of T, you're going to be seeing a class with 1,000 other kids. Professors at the front can't see you. There is no personal relationship with the professor. The relationship is with the seminar leaders. And I can see doing something like that, where we have a professor of record who is present in the course, but
a TA, a fully qualified TA, probably means a new PhD, is actually taking the students through the course, doing the grading, doing the forum presentations. If there's any question about the grading of the facilitator, it goes to the professor of record, who is ultimately responsible for all of the outcomes of the course. And that says that I can keep a course at say, 25 and have 4 sections of it with one tenured prof at the top.
Okay, so each section then has a tutor.
Yes.
100 students would fall into 4 sections of 25. That makes sense on how to keep class sizes manageable for the participants themselves.
You know, the trade-off on that is that I've heard this from students, and I've heard it certainly from administration. The students want to have the full-time prof. I said, well, fine, but there's only one of them, and I'm not going to take a prof that teaches 6 different courses and say, now you're teaching only one, because then I have 5 courses I have to populate.
You know, I saw a model once back in 1998 when I was first being trained in online teaching and learning. And that seems like that's a whole generation ago. That was when we were first experimenting with all these things. A guy named William Drake wrote a book on how to do it, and then became very successful promoting his work in colleges around the United States.
Mm-hmm.
He had weekend seminars that he would charge $100 for, and you would go in on a Friday afternoon, and then you'd come out on a Monday morning. It was done entirely online, and he would put 800 students in one weekend seminar. Now, that's 800 students with him and his assistant pulling in $80,000 a weekend.
Nice work if you can get it.
Simply to scale this out for community colleges. Mm-hmm. So he divided us, and the way he managed the groups was he divided us all into groups of 25 within the same course. So if you were in group A, you saw only group A. You didn't weed through other 775 people, because that would have been way too much for us to handle.
Absolutely.
Can you see a model like this, or is this similar to the model that you just described, where you've got one course that's broken into 4 sections inside of the same class?
Yes, it is. It's very similar.
Okay.
The one piece I'd want to take further is that from the 25, I'd like to divide them into smaller groups as well.
Oh, sure, like groups of 5 or something like that.
Yeah. Then you can get a media kind of discussion happening.
Right. I had a teacher do that in a group of 25, divide us into 5 groups of 5. But over the course of the semester, attrition occurs. Mm-hmm. And some groups end up with only 2 people at the end, and other groups maintain their full complement of 5. So
right.
That made it difficult to do group projects. Would that be addressed at your level of administration, or would that be something that the faculty member would have to adjust for himself or herself?
Well, ultimately, I tell the faculty member it's their decision, but I'll make recommendations. And so I had, as an example, a faculty member in my office this week saying, you know, my course is starting up. Typically, we see attrition happen in the first few weeks, and that's going to skew our groups. And I said, well, there's nothing to prevent you from recreating the groups. You know, if you want groups of 5 and a bunch of people have dropped out, let's just recrank the groups into new ones.
Sure. You know, there's a software that does that, Canvas, that auto-cranks those groups.
Yep.
If you have 3 groups scheduled out across 15 weeks in discussion areas, the 3 groups will always be about 1/3 of the class. So if a person drops, if a class drops down by 5 people, some of those people will shift from group 1 to group 2.
Yes.
And they won't even be affected by it, because as far as they're concerned, they're still in a discussion group. Mm-hmm. So that seems to be something that software can do.
Yeah, it should be able to.
Okay. Well, you would mention that you customize Moodle to take care of the specific needs at hand. Does it get this granular in terms of being able to adapt to the changing needs of the institution or of the way the courses are developed?
Interesting question. And let me give you a story to answer it. Moodle was there when I joined, and that was fine. About 2 years later, the chief financial officer came to me and he said, we've decided to drop Moodle and we're going to go for an enterprise system called Genzabar. And you're going to be the administrator. So I've never done Genzabar. Can you tell me what it is?
That decision was made without consulting you.
Yes.
Wow.
It turned out to be a bad decision, and we're back to Moodle. I was sitting in on the training, and before the trainer got started, I had my hand up and I said, can you tell me if this is SCORM conformant? He didn't know what SCORM was. And I looked at the CFO and I said, Randy, we have a problem. And indeed we did.
Wow.
The structure of the learning management system, it's very similar to Blackboard, was awkward. You needed to have more of a computer science background than I had, because what I could do in Moodle with 2 clicks, I would need 6 in Genzabar. We did manage to convert over to it. The faculty hated it. I certainly didn't like it. I found that all of the courses that we had created already had to be redone from scratch in the new system. It just didn't make sense. And so we ended up going back to Moodle, which satisfies everybody.
Sure. Yeah, sometimes decisions that are made administratively they look practical on paper, but in application,
It
they
doesn't work.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's what happened with the Genzabar system. It was not better in any way. And so why are you sticking to it? I also was really quite concerned that the decision was made without asking me, because by that time I had administered 6 or 8 different systems already.
Right. Yeah, you would have been the first person who should have been tapped on something like that when the thought comes into the mind of whatever provost is making these, are responsible for making these kinds of decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So scaling out beyond London, Ontario, you have in Canada a very interesting First Nations population.
Yes.
That's above the 60th parallel.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see this model being applicable to them?
I know it is. And my reason for saying I know it is we have a small group focused on our Aboriginal people, and they're using the system. They're using this approach.
What about south of the 49th?
You mean down the U.S.?
Yeah.
I have
typically Tyndale in the United States.
We're already there.
Okay.
I already dropped students from the U.S., and it makes perfect sense. My credit is an ATS credit, so it's transferable. Then it's online, which is then transferable again. I haven't been actively looking to market to the States, but they do represent probably about 10% of my enrollment. And so the compliance activity I'm in right now is designed to protect that market. And then, as I mentioned at Access a year ago, if we get to 2021 and I'm the only school that is ready for the disabled, where are they going to go? They get the same degree, and they're using American dollars in Canada, which is pretty cheap.
Right. Yeah, that's like living in the most expensive area of the United States, but being able to study in a much less expensive area.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And what you mentioned about ATS accreditation is very important. It's key, because
absolutely.
Somebody who receives a degree from Tyndale can work anywhere in the United States.
Mm-hmm. It's exactly the same accreditation.
That is that makes you attractive.
Well, my wife thought so too.
Yeah. Well, very cool. So you've got a program that is transferable. You've got a program that is compliant. Now, these compliance codes that you're pursuing, between now and the deadline of 2021.
Hmm.
That's for the province of Ontario.
Yes.
Are there any other provinces in Canada also requiring you to engage in these kinds of compliance models?
Actually, it's embarrassing to say, but no, there aren't. Ontario took a different approach to the compliance issue. It's not based upon funding. So in other provinces, if you're not publicly funded, don't worry about it. In Ontario, it's based upon your employee count. So if you have 50 employees, you have to be compliant by 2021, regardless of where your funding is coming from.
And Tyndale has more than 15 employees.
We have 250.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, if you're compliant for Ontario, then that would seem it would seem to be the case that you'd be compliant for the United States Department of Education.
Absolutely. When you look at the laws, both the ADA and in Ontario it's the AODA are identical. I've read them both in detail, looking for the differences, and basically it comes down to one clause at the end of the ADA law that says expect American Sign Language to be required. That's not stated in the Ontario law, but that's the only difference. So
Oh, wow.
this is again one of the things I did at the Access Conference was I presented my course as being ADA compliant, not Ontario compliant, because they're the same thing.
Sure, yeah. So that means that all of our colleges here in the United States can expect one day American Sign Language to be required.
Yes. Well, for me, it's going to be 2025.
Okay. Well, that's something that that's important to think about now, or how these compliancy requirements affect our own institutions. What advice would you give U.S.-based institutions that are not subject to Ontario compliancy?
Okay, there's a couple of realities we have to consider. This is going to happen. It is. It may not be this year, and it may not be in 3 years, but it's going to happen. It's a worldwide movement. It's an international standard, and we've all bought into it. So, what I was saying at Access was, it's great that we're all getting together to talk about this, but it's now time to plan it. Because if you're all of a sudden thrown at a deadline the way I've been, you're in a scramble to try and achieve it. And if we can get the background work done first, it puts you in a position to actually pull it off. So I think that the schools need to get the plan in place, know exactly what is it we have to do, how long is it going to take, how are we going to do it? And then you need the funding.
Right. Well, if we know our target, it would seem that we can plan for funding to ensure between now and whenever what it is that we're pursuing is going to be mandated. For instance, American Sign Language. We've got the structures in place that will enable us to do it without scrambling last minute.
I hope so. And I'm also hoping that, I can be sharing what I'm doing with my American friends, and if I have to learn the hard way, you guys don't.
You should write a book.
I should. Maybe I will.
I know a publishing house that'll publish it.
Okay, write a book.
Yeah, put that on your list. Yeah.
I'll put it on the bucket list.
Bucket list for this weekend.
Yeah, right.
And you could write it it could be to my successor at Tyndale. That could be its working draft. And then from there, it's easy,
Well, yeah, exactly. And I'm going to be doing that anyway.
Right. I
think you should entitle it, I Could Write a Book.
I was sitting with the Wiley representative down at when we had dinner at Access. And I mentioned to him that that's what I was thinking about doing. And I was surprised that he wasn't interested. I was telling him, I've been in this since 1982. So where are you going to find someone with all the history?
Wow.
See, I could see doing that.
If it's not Wiley, somebody else is going to jump at that, especially as institutions start to have to scramble. They're going to be looking for materials, and that's when publishers will say, oh, wait, we've got an economically viable product here. There's a market.
Yeah.
So it's like in the United States with outcomes-based assessment. So you started seeing outcomes-based assessment becoming more of a law of the land in terms of what accrediting bodies were expecting. Roughly around the early 90s, maybe late 80s. So outcomes-based assessment has been with us for 3 decades. But it's amazing how many accreditation visits I've been on where the accrediting team meets with the assessment committee who's in awe of the fact that it's actually being required to do outcomes-based assessment. This would be 3 accrediting cycles later for these institutions. And there should be strong assessment processes already in effect that are somewhat, they leave a lot to be desired from institution, but it's almost a common occurrence in American theological institutions and even in non-theological institutions where outcomes-based assessment has not yet become systematized. Of things as simple as curriculum mapping. Like Aline is working on, it seems.
Yes.
So whoever can crack that nut and provide a standard, easy outcomes-based assessment model for theological schools, that's going to be something that that could be useful. I tried writing one with Jerry McCarthy and Mark Latkovich. And we posted it on the ATS website. But how many schools will pick it up and will engage it? Yeah.
Let me ask you: Did you include rubrics for the assessments?
We did, yeah. And with theological education, it's interesting because we're not just doing intellectual assessment. As you know, in the programs, you're also doing pastoral formation assessment, human or personal formation assessment, and spiritual formation assessment.
Right. I've run into those problems. There is a taxonomy of learning for it. It's done by a fellow named Krathwohl, Krathwohl. He worked with Gagne, and he said this is all well. What we've done with Bloom's taxonomy is all well and good in an intellectual domain, but it doesn't look at the affective domain. And so I brought Krathwohl in when I first designed the spiritual formation course and said, okay, this is how we can talk about observable and measurable learning outcomes within a domain like spiritual formation.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's great. Yeah, Bloom didn't come up with an affective taxonomy until almost a decade after he put out cognitive, but everybody uses the cognitive because they say, okay, this is knowledge, comprehension, etc. These are the building blocks of what it is that how we come to learn, our epistemological building blocks. Another one that I've been exploring for the past several years, and one which one of our faculty, Father Randy Soto, has actually implemented in his own classes as an experiment, is that of Lee Schulman. And he put together a table of learning that he says, okay, this is not a taxonomy because taxonomies require you to start at bottom and work up. This draws in not only the cognitive and affective dimensions, but it also does it in such a way that it meets the students where they are, because we're getting so many students into our theological institutions who are coming in as second career or second vocation or whatever, and they've already have affective maturity in whatever their first career was or first experience was. So they're bringing that with them into this this world of theological education. So he says you can start, and it doesn't matter what your outcome, you can start at any point along this wheel of this table that he's created. So he's provided a useful resource, Lee Schulman, in his table of learning.
I'll go and look that up.
And I'll look up, you said
Krathwohl.
Krathwohl, yeah. We have 2 minutes remaining. Aline, do you have any additional thoughts?
Nothing besides the point that I am very thankful for this conversation. This was quite informative. Even the last part we are Christians. We do leave the best wine for last, aren't we? About how do we assess that learning, and how do we, we map it in such a way that we know that students do learn. So I'm very thankful. I really am thankful for this webinar, for the presentation, for the discussion on distributed learning, and pushing the agenda forward on how we meet our students where they are. Distance education used to be an innovation. It's time for us to explore other areas and never stop exploring, right? So I'm very thankful for a conversation that takes us further. So thank you.
Well, thank you for coming. And Sebastian, thank you for hosting.
Certainly. Last thoughts from you?
Well, I think that what we're looking at right now is an inversion of the enrollment. 12 years ago, if I got 5 people in a class, I was doing well. At this point, I can't open the classes fast enough. The reality, I think, as we look forward, is that distributed learning is going to become the dominant mode of education in the 21st century. And we need to understand its potential and its complexity in order to capitalize upon it. And as we see these enrollments shifting, I think we're going to see a lot of players coming into the game in areas that, I don't want to have to do transcripts of videos. So give me something that'll do it for me and punctuate it. We can get the transcript through YouTube, but we can't get the punctuation yet. And that can present real problems to people who are challenged.
Right.
So, yeah, I think really we are into the revolution of distributed learning now. And for the sake of our institutions, we need to climb aboard and become actively involved.
And provide a foundation for those who follow us.
Yes.
On which they may build.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Well, thank you. Go ahead.
It's an institutional initiative at this point, and it has proven itself to be too big to let go. I mean, what would happen to Liberty if they gave up their online learning?
Right.
Probably shut down. It's too big to fail.
Mm-hmm.
Or the Nazarene School of Theology as well, 100% online.
Yep.
And many of the schools that formed online programs in order to remain financially viable. And we would quite a few theological schools.
And I think we'll see more and more. I'm pretty excited. It's terrific to have been in a field since its real inception.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you should know that my own first online course that I taught was the first full credit course in the college system in Ontario. And from there, I was pulled off to 9 other colleges to get them started too. So I've been in it right from the inception when those systems were awful text-based things.
Oh, well, you're the fountainhead.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
We've been listening today to Dr. Larry Hopperton, Director of Distributed Learning Technology at Tyndale University College and Seminary. Larry, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Look forward to having you back next week.
Terrific.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.